Thank you for inviting me for this talk. Like I said before, we are spending a lot of money in trying to find out and generating AKI alert systems, AKI biomarkers, but we are not trying to invest in, actually developing the true AKI alerts, which are our care physicians. So AKI is bad. We all know that. 5 to 7% of acute care hospital admissions or 30% of ICU admissions have AKI, and it's associated mortality with such. The numbers are so bad that even an uncomplicated AKI, a prerenal AKI, can have and can increase the mortality by almost 10%. And more than 20% of patients with an AKI will die, rising to 35% in those with stage 3. So it's truly a time to think kidneys. So just a brief outline of my presentation. I'll start with the case, then probably give some highlights about the definition, the causes, investigation, how to approach the diagnosis, how to manage at a community level, when to refer to a super specialty, common indications for dialysis, because that is when patients usually will reach out to you that my nephrologist is asking for dialysis, should I do it or not? And while busting certain common myths, and if time permits, we'll discuss the second case also. So without wasting much time, beginning the first case, it's a 65-year-old lady, Vandana, presents to you at your clinic with a 5-day history of diarrhea and vomiting. She has consumed 3 plates of pani puri at the friendly neighborhood street vendor day before developing symptoms. This is just at the lunch symposium. I'm sorry to have done this to you, but she's come back from eating pani puri with a severe diarrhea and vomiting. She has been unable to keep anything down, including water, and now feels very poorly. In her past medical history, it is significant because she has hypertension, which is being managed with ramipril. She has type 2 diabetes on metformin, glimepiride, and dapagliflozin. On examination, she appears very dry, has a reduced skin turgor. BP is 100/70, heart rate is not too bad. Examination is otherwise unremarkable. So let's identify certain risk factors, because this is a nephrology meeting. We are talking about risk factors for AKI. So age is not on her side. She's elderly, 65 years of age. She's on ramipril. She's on SGLT2 inhibitors and metformin. And history suggests likelihood of severe dehydration, which can cause AKI. And maybe there can be an element of ketosis also, because she's not able to eat much. She's acutely ill, and she's on SGLT2 inhibitors. So what did you do? The family physician stopped the norfloxacin. They rightly started them on probiotic and antacids, and loperamide. Ramipril was stopped, and ORS was prescribed. However, the emphasis on rehydration was not put. The patient did not like the taste and hence did not drink. She thought it was only for kids. Why should I drink ORS? 24 hours later, the patient had fallen unconscious. You get a call for a home visit. As you reach home, you see that the patient is diaphoretic. She has cold, clammy extremities. The BP was 80. She was rushed immediately to the nearest hospitals. The initial labs showed a hemoconcentrated blood panel with a hemoglobin of 17, a creatinine of 7, potassium of 6.7. And ABG showed a severe metabolic acidosis with a pH of 7.02. Serum ketones were elevated. She was catheterized. However, there was not a lot of urine that was drained. The urine was muddy brown in color, and a rapid sonography done bedside showed normal-sized kidneys with no obstruction and no hydronephrosis. Drug history was again reviewed. Patient was on. I'm sorry. Drug history was reviewed. Patient was on ibuprofen for dental pain, which she had not mentioned to you, unfortunately. She was on Norflox, dapagliflozin, metformin, and herbal supplements to protect herself from COVID. She was admitted in ICU. A central access was obtained. Dialysis catheter was inserted. A rapid fluid bolus of approximately 2 liters in 3 hours was given, but this led to no improvement in urine output. She had to be started on inotropic support to maintain her mean arterial pressure of above 65 to 70. Broad-spectrum antibiotics were started, and all the other oral medications were discontinued. Her sensorium remained poor. She was breathless. She was hypoxic, and she was intubated and put on mechanical ventilator. And inotropes were increased to maintain hemodynamic status. She was initiated on hemodialysis with nil ultrafiltration. Gradually, fortunately, the patient's BP improved. She was extubated on day 3. She, however, remained oliguric and required 5 sessions of hemodialysis. And the urine started improving after day 8 to 9 of hospitalization. She was subsequently moved to wards and discharged on day 13 with a creatinine of 3 milligrams per deciliter, which on follow-up reduced to 1.8 and failed to reduce thereafter. Simple pani puri causing 14 days of hospitalization, almost losing her in the due process. So our diagnosis was AKI stage 3, most likely because of ischemic plus toxic acute tubular necrosis, precipitated by severe dehydration due to acute gastroenteritis, sepsis, and drugs. Probably with diabetic ketoacidosis or euglycemic ketoacidosis because of SGLT2 inhibitors in a case of type 2 diabetes and hypertension. So this is our case. We'll discuss what went wrong and what could have been done to prevent such a drastic worsening. Before that, let's just review AKI a little bit and an approach to how to address this problem. Rushing through the definition, an increase in serum creatinine of 0.3 within 48 hours, a short duration of time, or increase in creatinine to 1.5 times of baseline, which is known to or presumed to have occurred within the past 7 days. And mind you, it is not just creatinine which is used to define the diagnosis. A urine volume of less than 0.5 ml per kg per hour for 6 hours. What is this equal to? Like if for a 60 kg old lady, approximately 30 ml per hour for 6 hours. So approximately less than 200 ml in 6 hours would probably constitute a diagnosis of AKI. However, if it is a heavy built man, Kyron Pollard, more than 120, 140 kilos, a urine output of 60 to 80 ml per hour, less than 60 to 80 ml per hour would also be considered as significant. So approximately less than 600 ml per day of urine would fit into the diagnosis of AKI. So is it AKI or CKD? Very commonly, I've seen people, label every rise in creatinine as CKD. Well, not every elevated creatinine is CKD. Why is this differentiation necessary? AKI can be treated. CKD has to be maintained or controlled. And it helps in creating an objective in your mind. What should my target be? AKI is a sudden reduction in kidney function, which occurs over hours to days, whereas CKD is a slow worsening of kidney function over months. A baseline creatinine value is extremely important. It's extremely important to try and hunt in the history if a past creatinine was done, because that will give you a target to reach to. That will also tell you if the creatinine was elevated, this patient is at a risk of worsening of creatinine, has less renal reserve, and will guide you in your therapy choices, which medicines to avoid, which medicines to kind of curtail. Risk factors will also throw some light. If it is a diabetic hypertensive since 35 years, poorly controlled, old adult, he's likely to have some amount of renal dysfunction. Past urine reports, if they are showing albuminuria, they would also probably indicate towards the pre-existence of CKD. Kidney size is one of the most important parameters which helps in differentiating CKD versus AKI. Corticomedullary differentiation and cysts in the kidney also point towards a chronic process, but they're not absolutely diagnostic or definitive of a CKD and may be present in acute illnesses as well. So running through the list of AKI, let's just classify it to help us diagnose it in our practice. There are three different types or other causes of AKI. Pre-renal, which is because of changes which occur upstream to the blood flow to the kidney. Intrinsic, because of damage or injury to the renal parenchyma. And post-renal, which is a problem in the plumbing system and occurs after the production of urine. So the commonest causes are pre-renal AKIs, intrinsic being the second commonest, third commonest being post-renal, which are the most easily treated for that matter. If this is an important diagram to understand why pre-renal AKI occurs and why is it important to stop certain medicines. If you look at this, this is one single glomerulus, which is the functional unit of the kidney. And this is the afferent arteriole, which brings blood to this filtration area. This is the efferent arteriole, which takes the blood away from the glomerulus. And this is where filtration occurs. So the, very crudely putting, the difference between the pressure in the afferent arteriole versus efferent arteriole, the hydrostatic pressure is what drives the filtration across the basement membranes. So, in a normal individual without any medicines going on, a decrease in perfusion pressure, which may occur because of dehydration, leads to increase in vasodilatory prostaglandins, which lead to increase in afferent arteriolar blood flow, and increase in angiotensin, which brings about a vasoconstriction in the efferent arteriole, maintaining the hydrostatic pressure and normal GFR. If there is, concomitant therapy with NSAIDs or painkillers, there is a reduced vasodilatory prostaglandin response. This does not dilate. Afferent arteriolar does not dilate. The blood flow will not increase. Angiotensin 2 remains increased, so the difference in the pressure goes down and the filtration goes down, leads to a decrease in GFR. Let's look at this, diagram where there is concomitant therapy with ACE inhibitors or ARBs. there is in response to a decrease in perfusion pressure, there is increased vasodilatory prostaglandin response. The blood flow does increase, but the efferent arteriole does not constrict. Thereby, the difference between these two remains low. The filtration pressure goes down, and the GFR kind of suffers. That is mainly the pathophysiology of a prerenal AKI, why the prerenal AKI occurs. Talking briefly about intrinsic renal failure, it may occur because of vascular issues, glomerulonephritis, which will be spoken about by my friends later on this afternoon. Other large vessel problems such as renal artery emboli, cholesterol emboli, vasculitis, tubular causes of intrinsic renal failure, probably the commonest, which is either because of toxic ATN or ischemic ATN, which occurs in settings of shock, toxic ATN, which occurs in presence of sepsis, rhabdomyolysis, hemolysis, intratubular cast formations such as myeloma proteins, and interstitial nephritis, which may be due to an allergic reaction to certain drugs and in certain infections and inflammatory conditions. Post-renal, which occurs downstream the kidney in the, because of obstruction to the urinary tract, whether it is ureters, the ureteric orifice, the bladder, or the prostate. And these are briefly the three causes of AKI which would help you approach the diagnosis. Now, moving on to identify those at risk. Patients who are older, who have comorbidities such as diabetes, heart failure, liver disease, past history of chronic kidney disease or AKI, cognitive impairment, which will interfere with drinking fluid to thirst. These are risk factors for development of AKI. And in hospital, patients who are admitted with sepsis, who are on high-risk medications such as aminoglycosides, those who have inotropic requirement, those who are hypovolemic immediately after a major surgery, or who undergo contrast scans, these are at high risk of AKI. And it should keep at the back of your mind, the possibility of AKI should always be kept. What are the common signs and symptoms of AKI? Symptoms would be because of dehydration, reduction in urine output, change of urine color, which is extremely important. We can guide our patients to change their volume intake based on the change in urine color. Nausea and vomiting, severe thirst, and confusion and drowsiness may occur because of either a severely dehydrated state or even uremia and electrolyte imbalances. What should you be doing or looking for in the clinic? Check the blood pressure, obviously. Pulse volume, look at the feet. The first thing that a nephrologist sees in a patient is the feet. The moment the patient walks inside the room, the first thing that I see is the feet. And we touch all our patients' feet. Thoda आशीर्वाद भी मिल जाता है और मेरा purpose भी solve हो जाता है. So look for edema, look for skin turgor, look for signs of dehydration. Look at the bladder and look at renal angles and chest auscultation of the chest. One important thing about measurement of blood pressure is always look for a postural drop in blood pressure. You will pick up occult dehydration and occult autonomic neuropathy very early on, and will prevent a worsening of prerenal AKI to an ischemic AKI later on, and will save a lot of cost, comorbidity, mortality. And that is something which has been truly rewarding to us in practice. Checking off postural hypotension is very important. Hypertension may also be present in patients with intrinsic ATI, not with dehydration. Hypertension we already spoke about. Signs of fluid overload will be present as peripheral edema, shortness of breath, bibasal crackles, and raised JVP. And a poor urine output may either be due to a production in the water treatment plant, that is the kidney, or problem in the plumbing, which you may look out for a palpable bladder, and just simple catheterization will help things, help resolve things. In hospital care, look out for development of edema. Monitor daily weight. It's extremely cheap and effective way of picking up volume, water retention early on. Watch out for hemodynamic instability, especially in postoperative patients. AKI can occur, at an increased frequency in nosocomial infections, which are usually caused by resistant bugs. Adjust doses and watch for nephrotoxicity because of all the treatment that you're giving. Keep reviewing the chart every day, which medicine is necessary, which is useless and can be knocked off. Dr. Khanna, myself are known for, we are infamous actually for cutting down medicines in our treatment charts. And some physicians kind of dislike us for that, but that is something which is important for the patients. Giving a lot of, medicines may truly be harmful for our patients. Creating AKI alert systems and biomarkers are more expensive ways of picking up AKI early on in the hospital setting. A urine routine or a dipstick should be done in almost all cases, and a common basic biochemistry in high-risk patients with CBC, creat, electrolytes, BUN, calcium, and albumin proteins should be done. In a hospital, we can get an additional ABG and cultures. And a sonography should always be coupled with a post-void residual urine to look out for any bladder issues. Special tests may be done in individual cases with a CPK total to look out for rhabdomyolysis, a blood film to look for hemolysis, myeloma screen, and a renal vasculitis screen. Urine osmolarity studies and cast cells may be needed in some cases, and a renal biopsy and renal Doppler may be needed in more, uncommon cases. It's a simple urine analysis, a simple non-invasive test to perform. It can be done in your clinic also if you invest in a dipstick. Early signs of kidney damage in form of proteinuria and small amounts of blood can also be picked up, and then this can be referred to the nephrologist early. The earlier we spot and treat an AKI, the more chance of have it not progressing. It saves a lot of money both for the patient, the hospital, and leads to a reduction in mortality and morbidity. It's important to teach your patients in the amount of water intake or the color of water. A dilute urine is good. As the urine color darkens, you're dehydrated and should promote you to drink more water. And not all dark urine is concentrated urine. A muddy brown urine may indicate ATN. A cola-colored urine may indicate rhabdomyolysis or a hemolysis. So coming to treatment, up to 60% of AKI can be predicted, and approximately 30% of cases may be prevented. And that is where your role kind of comes in. Assess fluid status. Fluid resuscitation should be done as soon as possible and should be optimized upon. Stop nephrotoxic drugs and treat the cause. Nephrosave, Mucomix, Sobices are not the treatment of kidney diseases. They're just add-ons. And identify if it's an infection causing the problem, if it's intrinsic renal disease, if there are nephrotoxic medicines, if there is an obstruction, whether the catheter is obstructed, whether there is a renal stone, whether there is a surgery that is needed. Beware of medicines that may be harmful for your patient and make them feel worse when they're already unwell. Practice sick day rules. When you're unwell with any of the following: vomiting or diarrhea, fever, sweat, or shaking, stop the medicines which I will now mention forward and restart when you're well. If any doubt, reach out to the pharmacist or GP. This is something which should be prescribed to every patient when starting these medicines. Most of my prescriptions will have sick day rules written when I'm writing an ARB or an SGLT2 inhibitor. So all ARBs, NSAIDs, diuretics, metformin, SGLT2 inhibitors should be withheld when the patient is not well. What do you mean by not well? Diarrhea, vomiting, reduced intake because of any problem, urine infection, any sort of fever. It's okay if you stop these medicines for 1 or 2 days and reassess whether when and how they can be reintroduced. Bringing this picture in focus, but we don't have time to go to revise this. Coming to this next point, which is extremely important: when to give NSAIDs. NSAIDs are not bad, but you don't need to nuke every fever and backache with nimesulide or an ibuprofen. Prescribe only for indications of NSAIDs, and that too for short periods. For example, if a patient has a fracture, you may have to give ibuprofen, but don't write it for 15 days or don't write it for a month and then follow. Give it for 2 days and 3 days, and then as per need, the patient can take it. Try treating with paracetamol initially. If the patient is relieved with paracetamol, why escalate it to NSAID, which is potentially harmful medicine? And be aware of patients who are older, who are on SGLT2 inhibitors and ARBs for potential cocktail for AKI. Maintain hydration status when you're giving NSAIDs and monitor the blood pressure when they're on these medicines, and stop as soon as possible. When to refer? Whenever a patient has a severe AKI with reduced urine output more than 12 hours, creatinine more than 2 times and rising, urine dipstick showing abnormalities, the patient has a low blood pressure, has breathlessness, and he fails to improve after adequate volume resuscitation. A urologist may be referred to if there is an obstructive renal calculus, if there is a significant puncturomegaly with a significant post-void residue, or if there is a bladder or a renal mass, and patients who have a significant urinary retention. This is important. I get these contrast enhanced CT scans every time in nephrology before the patient comes to us for the first time. You don't need a contrast CT KOB before referring. There are very few specific indications where contrast helps. If needed, get a CT KOB done. Let it be non-contrast. It will answer most of the questions. And in case if it is needed, a contrast scan may then be done later on. Brief, in review of indications for dialysis, because a lot of times patients will call you that my nephrologist has advised dialysis, mera creatinine normal hai, fir bhi dialysis kar rahe hai. And many a times I've received a call as to why you're doing dialysis when the creatinine is just 2 milligrams per deciliter. The most important indications of dialysis are not based on creatinine. It is persistent refractory acidosis, electrolyte imbalances, especially hyperkalemia of more than 7, which is not responding to your medications, intoxication such as ethylene glycol, volume overload, which is refractory, and uremic signs and symptoms, mainly uremic NCAF and uremic pericarditis. Remember this by your vowels, A, E, I, O, U. That's an easy way of remembering things on your fingertips. Common myths, diuretics will prevent AKI. This is not true. The KDIGO guidelines don't recommend, treating with diuretics. Yes, if there is volume overload, you can use it, but it is not, there is no benefit of changing an oliguric AKI to non-oliguric AKI, and it's not a urine recommended mode of pharmacological therapy. Nephrosave, Mucomyx, Sobicid, Sudamit are not the treatment of AKI. You have to invest in finding out the cause, invest time, energy, and investigations. And Nephrosave is an antioxidant. Sudamit is to counteract the metabolic acidosis. It is not indicated in preventing or treating the AKI. Every elevated creatinine restrict water intake and protein intake. That is not true. In fact, in AKI, we may have to increase the water intake. We may have to supplement with proteins. Low dose dopamine will improve urinary output and prevent AKI. That is also, this myth has been dispelled long ago. Dopamine has been associated with significant arrhythmias and hemodynamic compromises and does no benefit. There is the concept of renal dose dopamine has been done away with. Normal creatinine. Can I safely prescribe NSAIDs, aminoglycosides, contrast? No. An elderly with a normal creatinine may have a reduced GFR. A patient with reducing urine output may have a compromised renal function. And no, just creatinine is not enough to tell you whether it's safe to prescribe some medicines or not. And dialysis at normal creatinine, nephrologist is wrong. I just explained to you previously that the more important indications for dialysis are not based on creatinine. Questions: how do we approach when there is a case of AKI in front of us? Ask
Akash,
yourself
you'll have
about
to summarize.
So last 2-3 slides. Patient illness. Can this illness potentially lead to AKI? What are the risk factors? What medicines my patient is on? Assess the volume status. Check the feet, bladder, renal angles, and auscultate the chest. And basic investigation package should include urine analysis, creatinine, electrolytes, and USG. If you want to click a photo of this slide. Use it for every patient who comes to you, and you will pick up a lot of AKIs and mitigate the worsening of AKI. Coming back to our case, probably the last 2 slides. Vandana, we could have prevented an AKI here if we would have taught her about sick day rules. She was on multiple medicines which needed to be stopped in sickness. When she presented to you for the first time, she had a pre-renal AKI. Severity of diarrhea and dehydration was underestimated. The patient was not explained the importance of volume resuscitation. History of ibuprofen was missed. Volume status could have been better assessed. And she was a high-risk case. Early investigations at baseline should have been done. And sick day rules failure. We did not stop SGLT2 inhibitors and metformin was continued. This led to AKI, which was much worse, led to ischemic ATN requiring inotropes, ICU care, dialysis, long hospital stay. We were fortunate to save her, but we would have easily lost her. And it led to a residual damage, which will ultimately lead to a lot of morbidity. So I will have to skip the second case for the paucity of time, but just going to my take-home slide. You should always ask this patient, can my patient get AKI? Look out for risk factors in comorbidities and medicines. Volume status needs to be assessed. Screen whenever possible. Avoid polypharmacy. NSAIDs only when indicated. Sick day rules should become a standard practice in general practice as well as for nephrologists. And early diagnosis and early referral will save a lot of money and will save lives. And in hospitalized patients, look out for worsening of volume status and bladder monitoring and reviewing of drug chart every day. We need to stop this kidney attack. As important as it is to prevent heart attacks, it's important to prevent the kidney attack also.